Welcome to Smart Sex, Smart Love, where talking about sex goes beyond the taboo and talking about love goes beyond the honeymoon. My guest today is Michele Weiner-Davis, a renowned licensed clinical social worker, marriage and family therapist, and the founder of Divorce Busting Center in Boulder, Colorado. She coined the term divorce busting at an American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy conference in 1989, and she continues to be a champion for the sanctity of marriage and saving relationships. Michele is a best-selling author of 8 books, including Divorce Busting and the Sex-Starved Marriage. Her most recent book, Healing from Infidelity, is a divorce-busting guide on rebuilding your marriage after an affair. She made many national media appearances on divorce prevention and is a sought-after speaker whose TEDx Talk on the sex-starved marriage has had more than 9.5 million views. Her website, www.divorcebusting.com, offers valuable information for people in troubled marriages. Michele has received several prestigious professional awards, including Outstanding Contribution to Marriage and Family Therapy Award from the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Today, Michele will talk with me about sex-starved marriages and infidelity. Welcome, Michele.
Hi, good to be here.
It's great to have you here. I've known Michele many, many years at a conference we used to attend called Psychotherapy Networker, which still exists. And this came out because her on my podcast, because on Facebook, I posted a video that I did, and I said that I didn't believe that staying in a marriage was right for children. That and that there's been research that showed the first 2 years can be troublesome, but that things work out. And then, Michele, I think you said, but you're more of an advocate to stay in the marriage.
Well, what I would say is that, I specialize in working with couples who teeter on the brink of divorce. And I would say that almost all of them, not all, some people don't have kids, but the ones who do will almost always say, if it weren't for the kids, we wouldn't be here. How a therapist responds to that statement, I think, can make all the difference in what transpires. So, for example, I could say, well, that's not enough reason. In what other ways do you love your spouse, and why else would you want to work on this marriage? And when people come to therapy, they're not necessarily sure they want to. And by asking that question, in a sense, it seals the deal, because they will repeat their narrative that they don't want to work on the marriage, or they're pretty sure they don't want to work on the marriage. But if over the course of our working together, I say, obviously you love your kids a lot. And I wonder, first of all, where in your family, in your growing up, you learned about the importance of family, of kids and parental relationships. So we get to talk about the importance of the parent-child relationship. Also, by the way, part of what I do in my intake, where I'm gathering demographic information, is I ask, how many kids do you have? What are their names? What are their ages? And then I say, tell me about them. I bring their presence into the room. I don't think over the long haul, people will only stay for the sake of the kids. But if that's the catalyst for people sitting in my room, I tell them, I give them kudos for really caring about their kids' emotional well-being. And I guess I should backtrack a little bit, because you didn't know this. I don't know if you know this about why I feel so passionate about it.
No, tell us.
Yeah, so I grew up in what I would call the East Coast version of the Walton family. I know I'm dating myself by using that reference, but I had 2 parents who adored me. I had 2 brothers who I pretty much loved all the time. We had a very, very close-knit extended family, because my parents were immigrants and all of their family members were near us. And so we were family all the time. Never saw my parents fight. I will never be in a therapist's office lying on a couch complaining about my childhood, because really, in so many ways, I thought it was incredible. Unconditional love oozed from the environment. And then one day, I was a senior in high school, and I was 16 years old, and my mom called us all in for an impromptu family meeting, which was not the norm in my family. So it was my father and my 2 brothers and me. where she proceeded to tell us that she'd been unhappy for 23 years in her marriage, and that she tried to work out the differences with my father, and which, by the way, keep in mind, they never fought, so we had no idea that there were differences. And she said there comes a time in everyone's life where you have to throw in the towel. And those words, even just saying them now to you, Joe, it was traumatic. It truly, truly was traumatic. And plus, keep in mind the timing in my life where I was being launched into the real world, going off to college. And my parents' marriage was falling apart. My nest was falling apart. And beyond that, something in my little 16-year-old brain couldn't really realize at the time, the family life as I knew it never, ever, ever was the same, because my mother was the hub of the family wheel. And when she decided to get a divorce, she resigned from the position, and it just truly never was the same. So it had this huge impact on me in a really, really big way. It's almost like the rug was pulled from beneath me. Did I figure out how to go on with my life? Yes. Do I consider myself damaged goods? No. Had my mother many times said to me, and I was very close to my mother even after her decision to divorce, had my mother said to me many, many times, listen, Michele, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have a best-selling book. She did say that. And what I said to her is, I'm sure I would have figured something else to get passionate about, but be that as it may. So I really strongly believe that if that is one of the reasons that people think that they're willing to work or would consider working on a marriage, bring it on. And I compliment them for their caring about it. Clearly, I have a zest for life. I don't think we only have one go around. I don't think two people should be miserable. That is not good for kids. But I don't believe that people have to be miserable, because so much of the time, and I know you and I probably agree with this, but when people think that they have fallen out of love, or that they're incompatible, or that it's just not fixable, part of what's missing there are skills. You know, it's a skill deficit. And I feel armed with those tools, and I readily share them. And so much of the time, and this is what makes me a psychotic optimist, so much of the time, if I don't really focus on should you or shouldn't you stay for the sake of the kids, but can you make your marriage a place you want to be for the sake of the kids, we're off and running, and very often not only does their marriage stay intact, but their kids have an intact home, which of course for me, given my background, is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
I never knew all that. That is so interesting, and I love the way you say it. So that's how you got into helping couples stay together, saving marriages.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to do family therapy. And so much of I worked at a social service agency in the beginning of my career, working with a social youth service bureau, working with adolescents and their families. And so much of the time, what I discovered when parents were telling me they're getting a divorce, I would do what most people do, teach them how to break the news to the kids, and how to get into support groups, and how to identify when the kid's struggling. But so often in that work, what I heard from people after the divorce was that if I only knew then what I know now about what it takes to make my life work now, perhaps I could have put more energy into, making my marriage work and keeping our family together. So that, combined with my own emotional stuff, made me really determined to probably spend the rest of my life helping couples avoid divorce if possible.
Yeah, what you have, you've dedicated book after book and articles. But tell us how you got into and what is a sex-starved marriage. Can you describe it?
Sure. So when people hear that phrase, a sex-starved marriage, I think the image that they get is that there is either zero sex, or a certain number of times per week that people should be having sex, and if they're not, it's a sex-starved marriage. But, unlike vitamins, which there may be a daily minimum requirement, there is no such thing, because people are so different. But what happens in what I call a sex-starved marriage, one spouse, often the man, but not always the man, so hear me on that one, is desperately longing for more physical closeness, more touch, more sex, more physical affection. And the other spouse thinks, what is the big deal? Would you just get a life? This is so not a big deal. But to the person who, in a way, their love language, their way of feeling connected, their way of feeling safe in the relationship is through touch, it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Because it really is about feeling wanted, about feeling loved, about feeling connected. A lot of times the person with lower desire thinks about sex in terms of, well, it's just a biological urge. It's like scratching an itch. But it is so not that. It is I've had the opportunity to really listen to the people who talk to me about what it's like when their spouse isn't interested in being physically close. And there's such a deep sense of rejection and hurt. And by the way, what happens in these relationships is when, especially I would say, well, actually men and women, when you're the higher desire spouse and you're hurt, you may go to your spouse or your partner and speak in a vulnerable way about how you're missing them, how you'd like to be more connected physically. And if those expressions of wanting more connection are not actually met with positive behavior, very quickly the vulnerability turns to anger, snarkiness, shutting down emotionally, going into a man cave, spending more time with one's girlfriends. And anger and irritability, guess what? Newsflash, it's not an aphrodisiac. So the angrier, the higher sex person is, the less the other person's going to want to be with them physically, and the less they want to be with them physically, the angrier they get. It truly is job security for people like you and me, because they are in opposite directions. And the other thing, what's really, I don't think that enough people, or even for that matter, enough therapists talk about, is the person, generally speaking, again, always exceptions, the person with the person with lower desire controls the sexual relationship.
They never like to hear that too. And it's because they feel like it sounds like they're saying it's intentional. It isn't, but it is the default, right?
Absolutely. I always say it's not because they're mean-spirited. It's not because they're trying to hurt the other person. But in essence, oftentimes, if they don't want to be physically close, it's not going to happen. And then to add on to that, not only are they sort of calling the shots regarding in the bedroom, but they expect their spouse to just accept that. If I'm not in the mood, I'm not in the mood. So go take a shower. And not only that, but be monogamous, which is really, when you think about that, and I know Esther Perel has done a really good job of showing that when somebody cheats and, has an affair, clearly there is a betrayal, but there's also a betrayal when one person who's less interested in sex or physical touch has no compassion, empathy, or interest in what's such a strong need in the other person. That is betrayal as well.
Okay, wait, I want to just pause there because I'm so glad you said this. That never goes well when I say that to a couple. And I don't know, is it because I'm a male? Is it because you're female that you can say it? Because generally, it's not always, because there are men that stop wanting to have sex too. But it's, in general, in my room, it's the woman. And when I bring up it is a betrayal, they do not like to hear that.
And you know what, Joe? I don't say that, but way I work, the way that I get into that. I mean, I'm saying this to you and to the people who are listening because it's true. But when I'm working with people, the way I try to develop more compassion isn't necessarily by confrontation to the person who has lower desire. I turn to the person who has higher desire and I say, tell me what that's like for you when you're reaching out, when you want to be close, and she's just absolutely not interested. In fact, I'll tell you a little story, and this was actually my TEDx talk, and this is a true story. Working with a couple for quite a while, he's a really laid-back guy, never complains about anything. I think they're going along swimmingly, and then one day, as you know, they wait to the last 5 minutes of the session to tell me what's really going on. He says, yes, there is something I would like to talk about. And I said, great, what's that? He said, He takes a deep breath and he says, really, there's only a 2-hour window of opportunity on like Friday night from 10 to 12 that I know she might be interested in sex. And if she isn't, I know I shouldn't even bother trying until next week because it's not going to happen. And he said it, you could tell he was distressed. But I looked at her and she had a smile of recognition on her face. And so I said to him, I know she's smiling. And she goes, yeah, that's me. That is what I do. But I noticed that you're not. Could you talk a little bit about what's going on with you as you describe this? And I know it was really hard for him. But what he said was, he turned to her and he said, when we're in bed together and I reach out to you and you're not into it, and then you reject me, and then you all of a sudden you go to sleep and I hear you breathing, and there I am in bed alone, staring up at the ceiling, and all I can tell you is that it is the loneliest feeling in the world lying next to you in bed. And to this woman's credit, she took it in. She started to tear up and she grabbed his hand. And you know what she said to him? What? Every time you touch me, I do this internal search, like, am I in the mood? Am I not in the mood? I never really think about what's going on with you that you're reaching out to me. Wow. Never. Wow. And I promise I'm going to do better. And he started to cry. And Joe, honestly, I started to cry.
I know, it's a very powerful thing.
I know, it was such a touching moment. And the beautiful thing that happened is she really, really did do what she said she was going to do. And here's what she learned in the process. And I actually learned this too in my own work with couples. It took some years to figure it out. But I'm going to say things to you that I know you already know, but maybe people who are listening don't. Sure. So the human sexual response cycle had been thought of having 4 stages. The first comes desire, meaning you could be doing just about anything, and you all of a sudden have this random lusty thought, and you get really horny, and you go to find your partner. The second stage is you start touching and you feel aroused. The third stage is if your body's working properly, you have an orgasm. And the fourth stage is resolution, where your body goes back to its normal resting state. But here's what she figured out, and here's thankfully what researchers figured out a long time ago. For millions of people, and most of them are women, but not all, stages 1 and 2 are actually reversed, meaning they have to be aroused before your brain goes, ooh, this is fun. I want to do this. I like this. And so many of these people have really, really satisfying sexual experiences. I always ask them, do you have an orgasm? And they go, yeah. And then not only that, but I saw how happy my spouse was and so much nicer to me. And we got along so much better for the rest of the week. And so it's been a misconception when women in my practice say, I think I need to go to the doctor because I have no sexual desire or I have low sexual desire. Maybe that's true. There could be physiological things happening, but maybe they're misconstruing what desire is about for them. They do not have spontaneous desire, but they do have responsive desire. And that is desire no less viable than spontaneous desire. So this woman discovered that, and it became a whole new thing for her.
I love that for them, and it is such a powerful story. How do you help the couples bridge that gap when there is that desire discrepancy? That's one way. Do you do other things?
Part of what I mean, it's sort of multifaceted, right? So part of it is encouraging the low desire spouse, again, often but not always the woman, to be, after she hears the heartache that it's been causing her partner to not feel connected to her, to allow herself to be receptive to her partner's advances more often, even starting from a neutral starting point, even if it wasn't on her brain, to see if this is a satisfying experience for her as well, and also the relationship benefits as a result. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is that So often, the stereotypical dynamic, which we all learned about in graduate school, is that, women need to feel close and connected emotionally before they're interested in sex, and men need to feel close and connected physically before they're interested in investing their energy talking or spending time together, or even sometimes being invested in being in the home and doing the things that need to be done. That's where people have a standoff. So in identifying what is this woman's love language, what does this guy have to do, which doesn't include buying new sexy lingerie or turning on something like pornography or reading a sexy romance novel, something completely different for a lot of women. It's completely different. Just help me 3 times a week make dinner. Just help me put the kids to bed. Just ask me with interest, how was your day? And let me talk about my feelings without telling me what to do. It's different for everybody, but being able to identify that in a lot of ways, that's the aphrodisiac for her. And once he sees it with that frame, I think he's much more willing to engage in those behaviors. The other thing that has really influenced my work in a very big way is the 5 love languages. I teach my couples about the 5 love languages. I have my own exercise that I do, and I'm happy to share it with you sometime, but it's too detailed. But what comes from that exercise is, for so many people, it's the first time that they connect the dots that he's not doing that because I'm not doing this. She's not doing that because I'm not doing this.
I love it.
I have them grade themselves on how well they think they've been showing love in their partner's love language in the last however long it might be. And it's the first time people give themselves bad grades, because up until that moment, it's always their partner's fault. That's the reason I haven't been doing real giving or showing love, but they recognize the reciprocity. And to me, that's when the magic begins.
That's so nice. Let's talk about the infidelity, because I know people are going to want to hear, and you and I'm sure you've heard it too. People say, and they'll say it all the time when I do social media, they never work, you can't get back together, you'll never trust again, you can't bridge the gap. But you don't see it as a deal breaker, I'm sure, if you're all about divorce busting. So
Right.
Can you share your wisdom about how can couples come back from infidelity?
Stop reading the internet, first of all.
I know.
So it's like, it's because I'm a systemic thinker. I know that a lot of my message, I'm having to deal with the other stuff that they're getting. I had a couple yesterday, Joe. They literally read 25 books before they got to me on infidelity. I didn't even know there were that many, but no, they did their homework. But also, and most of them were either sort of unbiased about staying in your marriage or pro-marriage. They ended up with me because that's what they wanted to do. I mean, in terms of pro-marriage. But she started sharing with me some of the stuff that she was reading on the internet, and even in some books about, once, just like you said, once a cheater, always a cheater. Cut your losses, get out of there, And I think it has to start, first of all, I think it's really helpful for people to get help. And especially if they've been ruminating and not getting past certain impasses, it's really important to get help. I'm also really biased about getting help from someone who believes staying in the marriage is possible. In fact, I recently had, I'm going to be working with somebody next week who's been to a number of therapists who have, she said, all the therapists told me to get out of this marriage.
That's a big thing. Do you know, that's a big thing, because they're having their own bias. And maybe they've been cheated on. If you've ever gone, and you've probably done workshops, I've been in them, when the presenter says, how many of you have been touched or experienced infidelity? 3/4 of the room.
I know.
Yeah.
We'd have a completely divorced world if we went with that, right? It's just,
Yes.
So I guess part of what I'm saying right now, and I can hear we're kindred spirits about this, it has to start with the belief that it's possible.
I agree.
And it actually it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's part of it. The other part of it is for most couples, especially if it's like a first time affair, I mean, it's the first affair in their marriage, their lives are turned so upside down. They don't know which end is up. And I know you know this, but it is so traumatizing to the betrayed spouse. So often they can't eat, they can't sleep, they can't function, they can't go to work, they can't take care of the kids. They think they're going crazy. They think they're going to die. They hope they're going to die. And it's really intense. And one of the, I would say, failures of a lot of people, therapists who aren't trained or haven't had a lot of experience, this isn't just, you need more than garden variety therapy skills, because you don't just ask people how they feel about things. These are people who need guidance. They need coaching. They need specifics. And I don't know about you, Joe, but when I was in graduate school, it was all about helping people discover the answers within. Sometimes people have answers within, and sometimes they need to say, don't do that. Do this instead. This isn't working for you. I'm curious, do you do that?
Do I do?
Coach people, tell them.
100%. Yeah, I'm not asking them always to dig inside themselves at all. I have lots of resources.
Yes. And actually, during the times when I've done training for therapists, and therapists have come up to me during breaks, so often what I've heard is, I hear you talking, and I want you to know that I just lost a client last week, and I contacted them to find out what was missing. And they said, you never told us what to do. We just came in week after week after week talking about the same stuff.
Right.
So I'm very programmatic, in my work with couples, in my book, Healing from Infidelity, and now I'm excited because I just did an audiobook. People have been saying you've got to make an audiobook, so now I have. There are steps that both the betrayed and the unfaithful spouse must take to get to the other side. And I'm very clear with them. First of all, normalizing any feelings that happen within the betrayed spouse so that it's bad enough they're going through this hard time, and then to lay judgment, another layer of this whole thing, so that they know they're not going crazy. They know they're going to come out the other side. And by the way, I'm telling you this because this happened yesterday. It was pretty overwhelming for me. I sometimes think the most important thing therapists can do with all of our fancy skills is just to remind people they're going to get through this and they're going to come out the other side. And of course, they need tools to get there. Normalizing the intense emotions, normalizing the radical ups and downs that are inevitable, really teaching the unfaithful spouse how to, sometimes unfaithful spouses, they really want their spouse to feel better. They just don't know how.
Yes.
Really don't know how. And that often pisses off the betrayed spouse because they think they should know what to do. No, why would they know what to do? Yeah. So really offering concrete suggestions to the unfaithful spouse. For example, I'm very big on extreme transparency, doing whatever the betrayed spouse needs you to do, including, passwords and closing social media accounts, making sure your spouse knows where you are at all times. And my New York upbringing comes in handy because if someone says to me, well, then I feel like I'm in jail, you know what I say to them? No one wants to be in jail for the rest of their lives. We're not talking about this is how you should live the rest of your life. You're going through a transitional period. There's a crisis here. And when there's a crisis, you have to behave in different ways. Yeah. And you can decide not to do it, but I'm going to tell you, if you don't and you're not answering the questions fully and honestly, you will not get to the other side. So I love that you're saying this. I say exactly the same thing. You do that too?
I love it. Yes. It's validating to hear you say this.
Good.
I will say, though, the one thing I see a lot of almost every day, because I deal a lot with the infidelity too, is that the person who is involved, who did have the affair, says, can't you just get over this? I'm done. Just why do we have to keep resurrecting it? And I have to say to them, you're going to have to keep resurrecting it until they're no longer needing to resurrect it.
Absolutely. And I'm hard on them too. I say, I really get that you're ready to move on. I really get that there's a pretty big chance that you feel so much better now that you are not being duplicitous and telling lies and you've stepped into the light. Well, guess what? Your spouse is in the darkest period of his or her life.
Yeah.
And you're on two separate journeys. And if you need to be patient, and not just now, not just 6 months from now, but even maybe 10 years from now, your spouse something might trigger your spouse and have a question or get sad. And you need to exercise that empathy muscle and show your spouse that you're there for the long haul. So as you can hear, me talking to you, I'm directing traffic. And I'm very clear with people. If you do these things, you will get to the other side. I had my couple yesterday. She found out that her husband had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 affairs during the brief 2-year period that they were together before they got married. She found out 3 days after they got married, as they were driving to a vacation together, that all this had happened 3 days after she got married. And by the end of the 2 days, they were figuring out how they could renew their vows. So it's possible. It's more than possible.
I love that you're so hopeful. I could talk with you another half hour. Maybe we'll bring you back. What else would you like to hear before we end that you didn't say that you wanted to make sure you heard people hear about your work?
Well, I mean, what comes to mind right away is that and you and I have talked about this, and I think you should do more of it. But I no longer even know how to do hourly sessions, because I have found a longer format of working with people, especially not just infidelity, but almost any difficult kind of problem. There's no bell ringing, there's no kid tugging at their sleeve, there are no distractions. You really can peel away the layers and have comfortable time to do that. So I encourage people to think about the format can really make a difference in terms of the outcome.
You're talking about intensives, right?
Intensives. I do 2-day intensives. When people want to work with me, I see them for they fly in, I see them for 2 days.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And the only other thing is, this whole issue of hope. No matter what the problem is, no matter what it is, it's so easy to fall into the trap of believing that how you feel in the moment is how you will feel forever. And the thing I've learned about feelings is they're transient. And that the thing I've learned about helping people is if you go to a therapist who doesn't believe change is possible, you need to go to a different therapist.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. I can't believe we've really never sat and talked so much like this. I've read your stuff, but we really think a lot alike. I love everything you're saying.
That's great. Well, I felt connected to you on we never got specific, but I love watching your little snippets on TikTok and getting to know you that way too.
So how can people find you?
Probably the best way would be, themarriageintensive.com is one way. As you said, divorcebusting.com is another way. And I'm always happy to answer people's email, which is michelle@divorcebusting.com. So that's how they can find me.
Awesome. Great. I'm so glad to have had you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
This happened. Let's connect again. Thank you.
For sure. So if you're listening, you can hear more of my podcast at smartsexsmartlove.com. It's also all over on Spotify, on Apple. You can also follow me on Twitter, on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also, and everywhere, I'm at Dr. Joe Kort, DrJoeKort. And you can also go to my website, joeKort.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.